Orange is the New Black. And you see like, the cop will be like, do you want a shot? And she's like, oh, she gets all scared, and like runs and does whatever the cop says. That's an inmate. That's an inmate. At the end of the day, if you act a convict, they wouldn't say anything to you because you're a cop. They're not going to talk to you. They talk about steak and lobster and yeah, man, that used to be there in like the 80s. That's not how it is now. You can eat expired cow hearts. That's what you get. What's up, everyone? So today we have a question by Yes Sir, who says, can you talk more about how federal prison has changed for white collar crimes, the human criminals, has changed, and how camos, or I think he means camps, aren't a cushy experience? Yeah, absolutely. So I love federal questions. So basically, white collar criminals, it definitely sucks for white collar criminals. I'm not a white collar criminal. I was straight drug offender, as a majority of people that are in federal prisons, but state prisons too, for that matter. My friend Lynn, who video on at some point, would definitely vouch for this and have a lot to say in this regard. The worst part of a federal sentence, in my opinion, was the waiting, the not knowing, how long you're going to get. Because federally, like anyone knows, you get a federal case. Like that whole saying, it's not a federal case, right? They don't say that because federal cases are not big deals, right? Because they are big deals, and they're such big deals that there's actually a saying about them, right? And every Fed case basically has a Department of Justice announcement where they announce it and they make it public. So like a lot of these people who do like white collar crimes, they are not like criminals, or not like I would classify as criminals. They do criminal things, but like these, a lot of them are just highly educated. A lot of them are highly intelligent individuals. Not all of them, obviously, but you're gonna meet. I think you're gonna meet a lot more intelligent white collar criminals than you are drug traffickers. Just kind of the thing, and it's really crazy, the paradox, because at the end of the day, like, I probably made hundreds of thousands of dollars as a darknet vendor. There are people who are doing half the amount of time that I did who made millions of dollars, doing white collar crime. They make substantially more money typically than your average drug trafficker or drug dealer. And, for the longest time, they're typically given less time. And I think one of the few cases where I saw where like dude got, really, he got the same amount of time that a lot of drug dealers get was like Bernie Madoff, and it's like, famous case. Everyone knows about that. But, like the camps, at the end of the day, I would rather be personally, I'd rather be in a medium, than be in a minimum security prison camp. And I'll tell you why. So at the end of the day, the amount of respect that exists is a very important thing when you're at an institution. So like when you go into a medium, it tends to be a very respectful environment, right? If I'm walking past you and I'm gonna say, excuse me, and walk past you. If I'm into you, I'm gonna say, oh, my apologies, I'm gonna be like, oh, please forgive me. But like, you have this modicum of respect. Because at the end of the day, when people don't show that respect, when there's disrespect, there's violence. That's why it happens. Is they're stupid people. They're disrespectful people. I find in almost any society, the more well-armed a society is, the more polite it is, right? So for example, like I've lived, in a bunch of different states, but out of the two that I'll compare is like Vermont and Massachusetts, right? So like in Massachusetts, Massachusetts is a massive state. I'm not saying that all people from Massachusetts are like this. I was born in Massachusetts. I was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to be more specific. So like I was born and raised in Mass. So I'm gonna talk shit, but like that's where I'm from, so I get to talk shit. there's a lot of really nice places in Massachusetts, especially like Central Mass, Western Mass. Like Southeastern Mass is trash. I think anyway. New Bedford, Fall River, all those places are just, they suck. Nothing good there. You get like Seekonk and Swansea is a little bit nicer. Definitely, Rehoboth and Taunton and Rainham and all those places. But a lot of them just suck. So like when we compare, politeness, for example, like in Southeastern Mass, it's like if something happens to my car and I have to pull over to the side of the road, I'm broken down on the side of the road. And this happened to me before, that's why I'm saying it. Like I've been broken down on the side of the road and like, people are driving by and they're beeping at you and it's, hey, asshole, giving you the finger, as they drive by. And it's like, that's kind of like what you should expect, and the places I've lived in Mass. So then I moved to Rhode Island, and like in Rhode Island, it's like I was selling drugs in Rhode Island, mainly coke, and this way back, we're talking like, I'm 38 now, and we're talking like when I was 17, and like, I jumped, by drug addicts, because I was selling drugs and I was solo, and I get hurt, they beat the crap out of me, and that's just kind of like how it went, like I just trying to survive, and that's what it was. So when I moved up to Vermont, and I remember like walking down the street, and I was walking, and there's another man coming this way. Like we're walking, I look at him, like he looks at me, I was like, keep walking. And like as we get close, like I look forward. So like if you're him and you're walking towards me and you're looking at me, like I'm looking like this. So like I can see him in my peripheral vision. I'm not like staring at him, you know what I mean? So like with that said, like I'm walking and like we're getting close, and he's like, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" I was like, "Yo, what do you want?" Like, what do you want? Why why are you saying hi to me, man? We're not friends. You know what I mean? You're like, what? Just saying hi. Severe PTSD, because like, I was 16, 17, man, I was homeless, so like I was just doing what I, and then like I been through a lot, man. So like they had severe PTSD, and that was what ended up happening. And it took me years to get to a point where like I could walk past like an alleyway and not look down it, to make sure there's no one hiding there, or not be ready to, hit someone if they try to grab me and pull me into it. So like it's just crazy up here, the difference in quality of people. You get pulled over, like you break down on the side of the road in Vermont, like you'll probably, depending on where you're at, might have someone pull over and actually ask if you need help, as opposed to giving you the finger or whatever. Now, all of that said, it's like going back to what I was talking about originally. In like the medium, there's a lot of respect. No one's cutting anyone in line, right? Like there's, and if they are, like they're corrected very, very quickly. But there's a lot of respect, like, the correction, like, so, the guards, they hate being called guards, so I call them guards in the BOP. So like, the guards would, they wouldn't, like if there was a raid, they would trash your stuff. Then you had certain cops that would just, they would trash people's cells, because they're losers who have never done anything with their lives. So like, they serve prison time. That's how they've elected to make a living, is to literally do a bid, and they hate you, because you're in there with them, and they resent you, even though, you're the reason they have a job, because they can't get a job anywhere else. They've never done anything that's, notable or credible. And like, a lot of everyone that's in a federal prison has been on the news at least once, man, I get so sidetracked. So in that medium, there's a lot more respect, because you have dudes who are doing life. You get dudes who have nothing to lose. So like if a CO messes with the wrong person or steps out of line, like they might get hurt, you know? They might get killed. Like there's been cops who've gotten murdered in federal institutions. So it's a real thing. But like, you know, no cops have gotten murdered in minimum security federal prison camps. So it begs the question, like, how is it, you know, that the people in the camps don't have it easy? If there's no murders or anything like that. And the answer to that is, at the end of the day, it's so tedious. It's like, at the end of the day, because there's no respect, like people are going to be cutting in line, people that will be walking into you, that they don't apologize, super entitled. So a lot of those people are going to be white collar criminals. They're, you know, a lot of them. I met more millionaires in federal prison than I have anywhere else in my whole life. And like some of these guys, like especially when they just come in, they're very entitled. You know, they've lived a completely different life. You know, like I would be lucky to get a gardening job from some of these dudes. You know, they wouldn't even look at me. You know, they'd see me with my beard and they'd be like, "Oh, look at that, you're trash," you know. They don't even know me, you know. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I have my beard, I have my tats, I have all that stuff. Because at the end of the day, I'm like a porcupine, you know. These are all different ways that I can make it so people don't talk to me, you know, and leave me alone. You know what I mean? That's essentially like in a you know, an environment like prison, like that's exactly what you want. People leave you the fuck alone. And it worked, you know. And like, you know, I never presented myself as some like, you know, tough guy, mass murderer, you know, like, you know, or stomp this dude out. Like I never, because I'm not. That's not who I am. You know, I don't enjoy violence. It's not something I don't know. Side issue. So when you go to these camps, though, it's like it really sucks, because at the end of the day, I mean, you got people being loud at, you know, midnight. They're yelling and talking and playing cards, and like there's just no respect for anyone else. So it's really hard to do time like that, which is why I prefer the medium, you know, to be honest with you. So I'm locked into a cell, and like everyone minds their own business. Everyone stays in their own lane, you know, for the most part. But that's, you know, I mean, and like, so, you know, at like a federal prison camp, like if the staff are going to treat you like trash, because they think a lot of people that are there, like, are scared to death of going to somewhere else. They've never been anywhere else, you know. They like think that being in this prison camp is like the best. And like, for me, I enjoyed the prison camp because I could sneak out and go see my wife, you know, and have a cell phone. Like and it was cheap to have a cell phone. You know, it's not cheap to have a cell phone in a medium security institution. They're expensive, you know. We're talking like $2,500 to $5,000 for a phone. A lot of people rent them out, stuff like that. But like, you know, at a camp, you know, like $200, $150 get you one, depending on the camp. How tight stuff is. You know, the one I was at had no fence, you know, and even if it had a fence, I would have had wire cutters brought in, and I would have just cut the fence and I would have snuck out, you know. Because like at the end of the day, if you're gonna put me in a camp, I'm gonna sneak out. And if like if that's not something like you're cool with, like, then put me in a medium, you know. That's where I would rather go there anyways, you know. It's like, I don't want to go in a low. I'd rather be in a medium, or, you know, at a camp. Those are the benefits of it, basically. But like, yeah, it's definitely not a cushy experience. You have nothing, you know. You have a mattress that's this thick, that is just hard plastic. It's not even really a mattress. And you know, 100 dudes have used it before you. And you know, nowadays you don't even get pillows. Like the institution I was at, they're taking away pillows. So like, we're building pillows into the mattress, and it's like, you know, the pillow is this big inside the mattress. There's no pillow. You know what I mean? Just you know, just so one less thing they have to spend money on. You know, probably stealing the new pillows or something. You know, they do kind of stuff all the time. You know, like we were supposed to get like burgers on Wednesdays, and what they started doing is taking the the regular burgers, which aren't even real. Like this color. Yeah, like this color. Like that's like, a burger color. In Feds. But like those are like the good burgers, and then like every other week we would get like these other burgers and they were like this color, you know, except they were like this thick and like that big around. I tried it once and I almost threw up. It was disgusting. So yeah, I just like accepted the fact, all right, like on Wednesdays, I'm probably not going to be eating because like dinner was nasty. If you like the federal inmates have a national menu that they're supposed to go off of, but they don't really go off that. They just end up serving you trash. Like if you Google right now, expired cow hearts, like look up, federal prison, expired cow hearts, and you'll see the quality of the meals that, people get. There's no FDA oversight with the food that the federal prisoners eat. So they feed them trash. They feed them whatever they can find, really. And you either eat that garbage, or, you're going to spend a ridiculous amount of money, if you even have it, getting ripped off on commissary and getting stuff that's just ridiculously high in sodium, so you can starve to death or you can have a heart attack. It's up to you, just absolute trash poison that they give people. It's a horrible, horrible way to live. Like there's, you see like the movies, like we like Google it and they talk about like buffets in the Feds. There are no buffets. No, serving line where it's like all you can eat. That shit is so ridiculously not true. I like the food. Like they talk about steak and lobster and yeah, man, that used to be there in like the 80s. That's not how it is now. You can eat expired cow hearts. That's what you get. You know what I mean? Like steak and lobster. Like people like, oh, is this tennis? You can play tennis and like, yeah, all right. Look at any federal prison up, right? You look them up and you zoom in at the tennis court. Tell me if you're seeing that. And with COVID, like these dudes have been locked in for a year, 2 years, 3 years. You know what I mean? So it's no joke. It's a really bad place to be. You've had, over 300 people who have died of COVID because it's like, imagine like, so everyone's like social distancing. Imagine being locked in a unit with 300 other dudes and you all share the same ventilation. One person gets it, you all got it. And how that works is like, if you catch COVID, we're going to stick you in shoe. If someone says, hey, let's say your name's Paul. Someone's like, hey, I heard Paul cough. They're going to grab you and throw you in shoe. And you get nothing. It's like being punished. You're going to solitary. And you're going to get nothing. Because some, asshole said that they heard you cough. So, like, it sucks. And, like, you're going to be in a place where everyone does have COVID. So you're probably going to get it, and you better hope you have a good immune system because the CO does his rounds. He does his count, but like you could be on your bed, like help. No one's helping you. No one cares. They're sticking you in the cell and they're walking away. And like, I know of instances where they've been like, hey, we think someone has COVID and they've packed up an entire camp and stuck them in shoe where they know COVID is and like everyone gets it, and it's a horrible thing to do, but that's what they do. So no matter where you are in Feds, if you're at a gladiator house, like a USP, a high security facility, some of them have a lot of killings. Some of them don't. So you have like with penitentiaries, you have like, it jumps off. So like it'll be like, maybe 4 or 5 years of quietness where no one's getting murdered. It's just quiet. And all of a sudden something happens and people are getting murdered left and right. And now it's, it's jumping off. And what happens is that institution has a different name. So, for the longest time, there's a prison in Texas called Beaumont, and it's nicknamed Bloody Beaumont. And then what happened was, it died down and people started calling it Buddy Beaumont, because no one was getting murdered on a regular basis. And, I think now it's back to Bloody Beaumont, people getting murdered on a regular basis. So that's just, that's how it goes. Like, they had, you got Chad Marks, who has a YouTube channel called Blood on the Razor Wire. And, he was in a USP, he was in a high security facility. He had like Big Sandy, and for a while they called Big Sandy Big Candy, because it wasn't popping off, and then it started to again, so penitentiaries are like that, where they'll be calm, then they'll be insane, and then eventually, a lot of times the BOP will just grab all those people and ship them out to a bunch of different prisons and separate them all. Then you have mediums, which is kind of like, between a low and obviously between a low and a high. And that's kind of what the level I was kind of comfortable in, was a medium, because you're in a cell. You have your own cell. I love having my own cell. I hate being in dorms. And a good amount of respect. And then a low, I was never in a low. But like a low, you got it's the same thing as a medium, but you have more, more child molesters and, more rats, because they're, a little bit more prevalent. And then, in a camp, you don't have any sex offenders or arsonists. But you, like, in a camp, you're going to have way more rats than you're going to have in a low, in a medium, or definitely in a pen. Like, they stick a lot of cops in those places. They stick, and again, that's because that's where they're the most safest. And it's not a lot of stabbings that happen at camps, not a lot of murders. I don't know if there's ever been a murder at a camp, probably, but, so, I mean, those are the ways. Basically, what you have to keep in mind is, like, the federal prison system, for the last 100+ years, have engineered ways to just make incarceration absolutely miserable for those that are there. And they've also engineered ways to extract the most resources and value out of the people that are there in order to make the biggest profit, get the biggest bonuses. They've learned to strip down any and all amenities that exist, because the less money they spend, the bigger bonuses they get. So, and you're lucky to get art supplies in federal prisons, man. Like, there's no TV in your cell. You forget about that shit. People getting stabbed over the TV. A TV room is probably the most dangerous place in a medium or a maximum security federal prison. Like, I don't even go to the TV room, man. I'm good. You catch me in the law library. Like, you go to the rec yard, and it's like a certain, class of, people who go there all day, and then, like, not all day because you have to have a job, but, like, but you must pay someone to do your job. But then, then you go to the law library, and, like, the quality of people is pretty much night and day. It's like, what's the quality of people, in prison who, like, play spades or play cards compared to those people who are playing chess? I mean, the guy playing chess could be a whack job too, but I hope you get my point, and that's how when I did my bid, I tried to surround myself with those kind of intelligent people. But yeah, so the camps definitely suck. It's just mental torture. The mental torture is different at a camp than it is in a medium, and I prefer the medium. Stick me in with lifers. I'd rather be in there with violent lifers, who are super respectful and know how to be a convict, as opposed to being in a camp surrounded by a bunch of inmates, and the difference between that is, like, you ever watched the total BS show, Orange is the New Black, and you see, like, the cop will be like, do you want a shot? And she's like, oh, she gets all scared, and, like, runs and does whatever the cop says. That's an inmate. That's an inmate. At the end of the day, if you act a convict, they wouldn't say anything to you because you're a cop. They're not going to talk to you. And if they are, it's going to be on a totally different level. I had a friend who is a super dangerous dude. Not so much anymore, but this guy, when he got convicted, he was the third highest ranking individual and the United Blood Nation. And like just he's an extremely serious man, and he ended up doing a lot of time. And I met him towards the tail end of his bid, and I remember I was talking to him one day. He's making he had a straight razor blade in his hand that he'd broken out from a disposable razor, and he's cutting vegetables with it, right? And he's got a straight razor in his hand. Like a cop walks up to him, and he's like, "Oh, do you know where so and so is?" Like one of his homeboys. Go, do you know where so and so is? We'll call him, Matt. Do you know where Matt is? I like your friend just cutting his vegetables and doesn't even look at the cop. And like one of my friend's homeboys, like this dude wasn't my homeboy. He's from a different state. We'll get into that. If someone wants to know about that, ask about it and remind me in the description. I'll make a video about it. But one of his homeboys is like, "Oh yeah, he was in his cell," and like my friend turns around with the blade in his hand, and he's like, "Shut up! Don't be telling the police where anyone's at." And that's because he was a convict. That's how he carries himself. He carries himself like a convict. He acts like a convict. That's who he is, And there's a massive distinction between the two. In a medium, you're going to meet a lot of convicts who know how to do time, who are men, who, you know what I mean? That's how they carry themselves. They show respect and they expect respect. And if you can do that, if you can act that way, you'll be fine, It's like, how do you want to do your time? But if you're not going to act, if you're entitled or you think you're better or like, you're going to bump into someone and not say, "Excuse me," or, you're going to cut someone in line, or someone's on the phone and you want to have a conversation, yell up to someone on the second tier, like all those things, those are issues, You want to walk past my cell and like stare in my spot as you walk past, like those are going to be major issues that could get you seriously hurt, or stabbed, or, anything's possible. But they're rules that, like, if you're a convict, and you don't violate them. You give that respect out because that's what you want in return. And makes everything kind of even, And like in a camp, you're not going to have any of that. People are going to do whatever the hell they want. And I don't like that. I like having like a stable kind of community. Even if it's a worse, more violent place, I think it's a better place, to be honest with you. So it's not cushy though. It's like, imagine me sticking you in your bathroom, giving you a book and telling you, "Hey, listen, every day you're going to work for 6 hours. When you're done working, you can come in here, take a shower, maybe watch an hour of TV," or, like a lot of places, a lot of federal prisons, you get unlimited TV. They keep it on all day. The place I was at, the camp, the medium they did, but the camp didn't, kept it on for like 3 hours a day or some shit like that. And, no one's, why? What are you going to do? You're going to riot? You know what I mean? I'll send you to the low. And you tell that to like some of the white collar offenders, like, "Oh, don't send me behind the fence. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, officer." I remember like one time I got called to the counselor's office. He's a CO. I got called to the counselor's office. They're doing CARES Act, which basically like CARES Act was like they were letting people out early because of COVID. So I went down there and I was the head orderly. So like they call me down and I go in. I know I have like no team, which again, if you want to know what that is, I'll explain it. Just leave me a comment. I go down there and, he calls me into his office and I over the intercom. So like I go into his office and I'm like, "Why am I here?" And, he's like, "Oh, we're putting you in for the CARES Act." And like, there is a lot of sadist staff that work in the BOP. Like a lot of them love telling people bad news. They get off on it. Like I've heard them laugh about stuff like this, telling, there's a guy who got CARES Act relief that I remember. He'd done 15 years. It was like a nonviolent drug crime, and he'd done like 15 years. And he'd gotten CARES Act, like they grant it at the local level. The warden grants it, then it goes to what's called region. Region's like in charge of a bunch of different prisons. Then you have central office, which is in DC, which runs the whole federal prison system. So you went all the way up, got approved. And like, they're like, "Oh yeah, like contact your family. Here's your itinerary." So like you're leaving on this day this is the plane you're going to be on. Tells his family, I'm coming home. He's coming home 3 years early. Major deal, and they're laughing because they were getting ready to call this guy and tell him, oh yeah, central office decided to revoke it, so you're gonna be here for another 3 years, and that was hilarious to them. So I have no patience with BOP employees when it comes to stuff like this because I don't trust them, and they're just trash. Once feel like, oh, they're good ones. I have yet to meet one. So at the end of the day, I go in there and he's like, oh, we're putting you in for CARES Act. And he's waiting for me to get overjoyed and excited about it. But I'm a convict. So at the end of the day, I've accepted the fact that I have to do my sentence. And I'm fine with that. I'm going to do my time. That's what it is. I'm not spending every day oh, I hope I go free because of the CARES Act. Oh, I hope one day I'll get out early. If you try doing a prison sentence like that, you'll go nuts, So you just be a man. You accept the fact that you're doing a bid, and that's what it is. And you get into your routine. You do your routine. You mind your business. Keep your head forward. Set a goal. Accomplish it. Set another one. Accomplish it. Keep going. Keep it moving. Don't stop. Keep your mind occupied. Keep your day full. That's your job, Rinse and repeat. So, this breaks my routine, which is fucking with my bid. So, so that's what I asked him. I was like, man, why are you fucking with my bid? He's like, oh, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And this is a counselor at a camp, and I just came from a medium. I skipped the low, and I detailed that in another video. I think maybe I detail it somewhere else. Anyway, if you don't know, I did detailed it on a couple of podcasts. If you guys want to know about it, let me know, and I'll detail it here too. So yeah, I skipped this low. So he knows, he can see in my file that I came from a medium, So where he's laughing at this other dude, he's not laughing at me, So why are you fucking with my bid? He's like, oh, what do you mean? And, I'm like, I don't care about any of this shit, I don't want to hear about this. Don't tell me when you send it off to region. I don't want to know. You know what I mean? And the next time you call me up, calm me down. He's like, oh, I just want to let you know, central office denied it. I was like, all right, cool. But when it got to region, so when I left, he ended up calling me back a little bit, probably 3 weeks after that. He told me, oh, the warden signed off on it, assistant warden signed off on it. So now it's going to region. Listen, when it gets to region, they're probably going to send a probation officer out to your house. So I have to tell my wife, I can't just have federal probation show up hey, what's up? We want to inspect the house. That's completely unfair. So I had to call her up and I had to tell her, listen, probation's going to be coming by. She's like, oh, that's great news. Maybe you'll get out. I was like, listen, I'm not getting out. It's just this is shit they do for fun. They do this for entertainment, to mess with people's heads, and, and she's like, oh, you're always negative, and it's listen, when you're in an environment like that, you have to expect the worst things because 9 times out of 10, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be that worst thing. Prison has a great way of crushing hope and extinguishing, that kind of light. I don't care who you are, at the end of the day, they're professionals at it. So you tend to accept, hope for the best, but you really don't spend much time dealing with hope, it's not Shawshank Redemption. So, at the end of the day, you just, what it is, you accept that life sucks for you until your bid's over. So, I ended up getting denied, and that's when she was well, why don't you, you've learned a lot about law. Is there anything you can do, to try to get yourself free? I was like, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, but it's a waste of time, And, her being her, she's like, it's not a waste of time. You have to go down swinging, fighting. She was right. And I did what she said. And I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it up. But even when I was doing it, writing my motion, I didn't have this hope of maybe I'll get free and maybe I'll do this. And you can't be like that. I was like, for me, it was I'm going to write this motion. I'm going to make this long ass motion. I'm going to send it into the court. And I win no matter what, because the United States attorney has to read it. He has to read it. He has to go through the whole thing. He has to look up every case. I know I can force him to work. And I was like, my mentality was like, I know I'm going to lose it, but I know I have to make him work. And he's the one who put me in here. So screw him. I'm going to write it. And that's why I wrote a 200-page motion, and he hated it. He wrote in his response, he's like, oh, Mr. Ben wrote a 200-page motion. And like, I had a chance to respond back to him. When I responded back to him, I was like, yeah. I was like, at the end of the day, arguing to the court, I was like, at the end of the day, that's how much, facts and case sites that I have to back up my position. Whereas the United States attorney, he only had, 1 page really at the end of the day that he could cite things. You know what I mean? I just he didn't like that too much. So that's what it is. That's probably also why you watch my DEF CON talk and, tried to, get me in trouble with that. But yeah, so it's a horrible system, man. And no matter where you are, whether you're at a high, you're at a medium, you're at a low, you're at a minimum, it sucks. There is no club fed. That shit is a myth, mystery. And it hasn't, it used to exist like back, in the 60s and the 70s, maybe the 80s. But like that club fed shit hasn't existed for a long time. It is total nonsense, and anyone who believes in it, I dare you to go there for a week, try going to a minimum security prison camp where the building is basically like a metal shed. Okay. Like in Texas or in Mass during the summertime, like it's like living in an oven, you know what I mean? And there's no fans. Like you'll see in the prison, they got like these little fans that the prisoners go with. There's none of that shit where I was. They don't have that in the majority of the places, Some places still have them, but a lot of places don't, A lot of places don't have AC, People die from heat stroke, like legit die. Like so there's no club fed, in the movies there is, in pretend land, but not in reality. In reality, it's a horrible place that's legalized slavery. Again, I've said it a bunch of times, and I'll keep saying it. It's the you look at the 13th Amendment, and that's what it is. It is legalized, sanitized slavery. And I think there are definitely people who deserve to be in prison. It's not my it's not my contention that no one deserves to be there. They're definitely, people who hurt children, who are women, psychopaths that murder people. Like, there are people who definitely deserve to be there, But I think the overwhelming majority of the people that are there because it's how the system survives, If all of a sudden we stop locking people up, we're not going to need prisons. And there's a lot of jobs in those prisons. And those people that work those jobs, they vote. Like, all of this stuff is connected. The companies that sell expired products on commissary for, anywhere from 10% to 100% more than they actually cost. They have business. Like, so this right here is an MP3 player, right? Wicked, crappy MP3 player. And I'm not gonna be able to see it. I have my autofocus turned off. But so wicked, crappy MP3 player. This MP3 player is $5 to $10. Like online, If I turn it on, let's see what it'll turn on. Oh, see it. I can barely see it. It's actually got a good amount of battery. I haven't turned this thing on in like a year and a half. So basically, that thing that costs $5 to $10 on the street, that thing's like $85 in feds. And then it's like, every song you want to buy is anywhere between like 50 cents to $3. Like, it's they make a ton of money, a ton of money. And that's what it's about. It's about making money on people, or from people. And the people who don't have money to buy stuff from commissary, don't worry. Federal government still makes money on them. They charge on average $125 per inmate, and like that's the reason why they go so hard not to let anyone go, is because at the end of the day, every person that's in that prison is $1, to staff that are there. That's their bonuses, that's their overtime. And sad, but that's what it is. And so all those people collectively that are in that system, it's just dehumanizing. It's something that's completely unnecessary and unwarranted, in my opinion, for the vast majority of people that are there. If you have any more specific questions about feds, absolutely, leave it in there, and I will get sidetracked on a, ridiculously, like I do every video, and we'll have at least some entertaining stories about how much feds suck, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.